Hello there and good afternoon. You're watching World News Program coming to you live here from Al24 News. With me, I'm Abdulrahim Kashur, and these are your headlines. Joe Biden accuses his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin of genocide in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko met to discuss the Ukrainian crisis. New violent incidents by the occupying Zionists broke out in the occupied West Bank against the Palestinian inhabitants. Passengers on Manhattan-bound train had to escape gunfire while being blinded by smoke during the Tuesday morning travel. Hello there and good afternoon again. Joe Biden confirmed Tuesday accusing his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin of genocide in Ukraine, a few hours after using this word for the first time to describe the situation in the country invaded by Moscow. The American president stated to journalists during a trip to Iowa that it's increasingly clear that Putin is simply trying to erase the very idea of being a Ukrainian.
Yes, I called it genocide because it's become clearer and clearer that Putin is just trying to wipe out the idea of even being able to be a Ukrainian. And the evidence is mounting. It's different than it was last week. The more evidence is coming out of literally the horrible things that the Russians have done in Ukraine. And we're going to only learn more and more about the devastation. And we'll let the lawyers decide internationally whether or not it qualifies, but it sure seems that way to me. Thank you.
Russia appears to be on the verge of the entirely seizing Mariupol, the besieged southern port city with the strategic importance that has been subjected to a catastrophic 6-week assault. Hussein Burkan on What Follow.
Russian troops steps up their campaign to take the strategic port city in the planned massive attack in eastern Ukraine. The city that Moscow considered critical for the second phase of the Russian special operation. During a trip organized to the destroyed Mariupol theater, the Russian army affirmed that Ukrainian regime used citizens as living shields.
When we start moving the rubble, the number of casualties will be clearer. What we see here is the practical application of the hostage-taking tactic. People were brought here from the houses, thus surrounding those who were trying to evacuate the city, and they could not leave the place.
In an attempt to put pressure on Russia, the head of the American diplomacy, Antony Blinken, said that the United States reports credible information on the possibility of Russia using chemical agents in its offensive to fully take the Ukrainian city of Mariupol.
We had credible information that Russian forces may use a variety of riot control agents, including tear gas, mixed with chemical agents that would cause stronger symptoms, to weaken and incapacitate entrenched Ukrainian fighters and civilians as part of the aggressive campaign to take Mariupol. We shared that information with Ukraine as well as with other partners.
Russian troops encircled Mariupol in early March. The siege has killed thousands of civilians, according to the Ukrainian leadership, which has described Mariupol as the heart of this war today.
Russian Minister of Defense announced in a statement on Wednesday that more than 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers voluntarily laid down their arms and surrendered to the Russian forces in Mariupol in the southeastern port city of Ukraine, which has been besieged for weeks. Let's have a listen.
In the city of Mariupol, following successful offensive operations of the Russian armed forces and units of the militia of the People's Republic of Donetsk, 126 Ukrainian soldiers of the 36th Marine Brigade voluntarily laid down their arms and surrendered. 151 wounded Ukrainian soldiers from the 36th Marine Brigade received medical first aid on site, after which they were all taken to the hospital in the town of Mariupol for treatment.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky offered Tuesday night in Moscow to exchange Ukrainian businessman Viktor, close to Russia President Vladimir Putin, and the recently arrested 4 Ukrainians in the captivity in Russia.
It is very symbolic that Medvedchuk was detained on Cosmonautic Day. He was in hiding for 48 days, but he finally decided to try to escape from our country. Well, for this, in a bad way, the infamous "let's go" did not work well. I propose to the Russian Federation to exchange this man for our boys and girls who are currently in captivity in Russia. However, given the repeated threats by the Russian propagandists to use chemical weapons against Mariupol defenders and the repeated use by Russian military, including phosphorus munitions in Ukraine, the world must now react in a preventive way. Because after the use of weapons of mass destruction, any answer will not change anything, and it will only have the appearance of humiliation for the democratic world.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko visited the construction site of the Angaro launch vehicle at the Vostochny Commanders in the Russian Far East to commemorate the first space flight made in 1916. The Ukrainian crisis was a main topic in the talks between the two allies. Miriam Siano knows follow.
President Vladimir Putin flew into Russia's Far East, where he met with his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko, marking his first trip outside Moscow since the beginning of the crisis. The close allies visited the Vostochny Cosmodrome to mark the anniversary of the first ever crewed spaceflight made in 1961 by a Soviet cosmonaut. The discussion was centered around the ongoing conflict in Ukraine.
It's an obvious thing. It was unavoidable. The only question was the one of timing. The thing we do, on the one hand, we help people to save them from Nazism. On the other hand, we take measures to ensure Russia's own security. It's obvious we had no other choice. It's the right decision. We have no doubt goals will be achieved.
In his first address since the beginning of the Russian special military operation, Putin said he will focus on the Donbass region, praising his soldiers' braveness and accomplishments, and that the Western campaign of sanctions will not be able to isolate Russia.
We are not going to be isolated. No one can be isolated in the modern world. Moreover, it's impossible to do with a country as huge as Russia. Therefore, we will work with partners who want to cooperate.
Despite sanctions on Belarus for allowing Russia to use Minsk for the military operation, Lukashenko still supports Russia and will further consolidate cooperation and strengthen integration with Moscow.
German President Steinmeier was on a visit to Warsaw in who was, he said, to return to normal diplomatic relations with Putin is not possible. Germany and Poland launched a joint appeal to Russia for an immediate humanitarian evacuation of inhabitants of Mariupol.
There can be no return to normality with Russia under Putin. The Russian war crimes in Ukraine have become visible to the world. These crimes must be documented and solved, and the perpetrators, who are politically responsible, must be held accountable. We call for an immediate humanitarian evacuation of Mariupol inhabitants. It is a call that we both make in the direction of Russia, in a view of the misery that we see, daily.
President Joe Biden deploys the additional inflation surge caused by the Russian military operation in Ukraine, which boosted U.S. gasoline prices by more than 18% between February and March. Let's have a listen.
The largest grain producers in the world, China and, Ukraine and Russia, are not doing what they usually do, so everything's going up. We saw today's inflation data. 70% of the increase in prices in March came from Putin's price hike in gasoline.
Chinese customs data shows that China's trade with Russia rose sharply last month. $11.67 billion is the number of the Chinese overall trade increase with Russia in March. Beijing and Moscow share no limit strategic partnership. Russia is a major source of oil, gas, coal, and agricultural commodities for China. And to talk more about the matter, joining me live via Skype from India, Dr. Gulraz Sheikh, an author and a columnist in the Foreign Affairs. Thank you for agreeing to be with us.
Thank you.
I believe this is what US and UK were afraid of from the very beginning. Russia-China alliance. Here it is. It is happening in the midst of this operation. Do you think that US failed to damage Russia's plans and save the bankruptcy of the Western financial system?
See, it was expected, and I think if they were not expecting it, then they are blind, I will say, because this is not happening the first day. This procedure of rapprochement between China and Russia is going on continuously since 2014, when the Crimea annexation and sanction imposition on Russia happened. Since then, China and Russia are coming together and close to each other by each passing day. And even if you look at the figures of trade last year, that is 2021, on year basis, you will find that it was more than 35% increase in a single year in 2021 itself, and it was more than $10 billion worth of trade happening that time. So they are coming together, and by the sanctions which United States and Western powers have imposed on Russia, they are basically serving Russia in the plate of China. And unfortunately or fortunately, whatever you will say on which side of the prism you look at the thing. But right now, one thing, the greatest geopolitical happening we are encountering in front of our eyes is Russia becoming a junior partner to China. And slowly, you will find that as the sanctions will hit Russia, definitely they are hitting Russia, but not the way that what West expected. One of the biggest reason is the dependency on Russian gas and oil on the Western Europe. So you will find that the foreign policy of Russia will be directed and dictated by Beijing, and this will be a great blow to the current world order. And one should not forget that Russia is not a lover of China, because they had so many issues in past. They also have had a brief war. Still there are border issues between the two countries. But Russia definitely loves the current, China loves the current regime of Russia, because anybody after the current regime comes in Russia, they will be definitely pro-West, and whosoever is pro-West will be anti-China. So China do not want that this current regime should destabilize. So they will do everything and anything to help them. But as far as the sanctions are concerned,
I'm sorry to cut your train of thought, Mr. Gulraz, but it is said that India now is taken aside by Russia. What are you saying about this, by not voting against Russia in the Council of the Human Rights?
See, India is not taking side of Russia, but it is neutral. We are not supporting, we are neither supporting Russia nor supporting United States. Our policy had been non-aligned since so long. Since the past 70 years, India has been a non-aligned player. So India will play what it is in the national interest of India. And one should not forget that 70% of Indian defense hardware, it comes from Russia. So we can't lose Russia as a friend, and Russia has always stood behind India, whether it is in geopolitical space or it is in defense space. So Russia and India are close friends, and even the United States of America understand that. And why I am saying that? Because Antony Blinken, just a couple of days back, he only said that there won't be any CAATSA sanction on India when it comes to S-400, because they understand that it's a 7-decade-old friendship. And even America is quite close to India. So India is having relationship with both US as well as Russia, and it will stay as a neutral player.
Perfectly understood. Thank you so much, Dr. Gulraz Sheikh. You join us live via Skype from India. Opinions in Finland about the country's possible candidacy to join NATO has changed a lot since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine. The Nordic country has launched a debate on possible candidacy for alliance by this summer. Nabil Khazini has more to tell.
Before the conflict in Ukraine, seeing Finland break with its historical line of a non-military alliance, was only a rhetorical option that lays dormant in a box for lack of sufficient support. But now, fear of a more escalation beyond Ukraine made the membership of Finland in NATO highly conceivable, both for elected officials and for the population.
Many MPs have changed their opinions. Many are still pondering what to think about it. And we are getting more and more information. Obviously, the members in the Defense Committee are getting and got more info before as well.
Finland published a key report on its strategic situation after the conflict in Ukraine, a prelude to a debate on a now probable candidacy to join the North Atlantic Alliance. In the calm North European country, nothing is more important at this time than the country's security.
And now we need to think what steps are the ones that gives more security for Finland.
In a few weeks, everything changed in Finland. Membership support has more than doubled to over 60%, out of a total of 200. Among the deputies who have already made their position known in the event of a vote, only 12 were against.
When the world changes, Finns have a knack of taking the decisions very quickly. We are faster at this actually than Sweden. So we hope that Sweden will, be able to keep pace.
Helsinki has also multiplied contacts with most of the 13 NATO members, as well as with Sweden, where the lines have also moved a lot in favor of a possible candidacy. But Moscow issued a fresh warning against the prospect of Nordic nations, Sweden and Finland, joining NATO, describing the military alliance as a tool of confrontation.
New violent incidents broke out on Tuesday in the north of the occupied West Bank, where Zionist forces launched another assault on Palestinian inhabitants for the 5th day in a row, which caused another Palestinian victim shot dead by the Zionist occupier. According to the official Palestinian agency, Wafa, Zionist soldiers fired ammunition and used stun grenades and tear gas. A total of 20 people were arrested across the West Bank. At least 45 people have been killed after days of intensely heavy rainfall in the South Africa's eastern coastal province of KwaZulu. The provincial government warned in a statement that rain would continue until evening in the coastal parts of the province. The death toll is expected to rise as a member of the South African National Defence Force were called to assist emergency rescue teams in the KwaZulu-Natal province. Officials said Wednesday that the death toll from a summer tropical depression that unleashed days of pounding rain caused landslides and floods in the central and the southern Philippines has risen to 58, with 28 others missing. A search and rescue efforts increased with the arrival of equipment over the weekend and early Monday. About 200 people were wounded in central Leyte province, officials said. Passengers on a Manhattan-bound train had to escape gunfire while being blinded by smoke during the Tuesday morning travel, which sparked a manhunt for a shooter whose motivations are yet unknown.
A man in a gas mask opened 2 smoke grenades, waved a 9mm handgun and fired at least 33 times, striking 10 people on New York subway train during the morning rush hour. According to New York Police Department Commissioner, the suspected gunman put on a gas mask just as the train was arriving at 36th Street Station.
Just before 8:24 this morning, as a Manhattan-bound N train waited to enter the 36th Street Station, an individual on that train donned what appeared to be a gas mask. He then took a canister out of his bag and opened it. The train at that time began to fill with smoke. He then opened fire, striking multiple people on the subway and in the platform.
Police described the suspect as a heavy-set short black male with a construction vest who believed his name, Frank James, is the man of interest in the shooting.
Mr. James is just a person of interest we know right now who rented that U-Haul van in Philadelphia. The keys to that U-Haul van were found in the subway. in our shooter's possessions. We don't know right now if Mr. James has any connection to the subway. That's still under investigation.
Hospital representatives said the injured from the shooting incident were treated at 3 nearby hospitals and their injuries were not life-threatening.
Yes, we have 16 total patients. 10 of them are suffering from gunshot wounds, and 5 of them are in critical but stable condition at this time.
Meanwhile, the American President Joe Biden expressed his gratitude for those who saved the wounded from the shooting scene.
Jill and I, my wife Jill and I, are praying for those that are injured and all those touched by that trauma. And we're grateful for all the first responders who jumped into action, including civilians who didn't hesitate to help their fellow passengers and try to shield them.
The incident comes simultaneously as New York witnesses an increase in violence for the past 2 years, especially on the subway, which has become the main focus of Mayor Eric Adams' administration.
Emmanuel Macron presented his points of view and proposals on the France too, saying that the far right has finally showed its true face that does not respect liberty and the French Constitution.
Malgré tous les efforts, le vrai visage de
I'm simply saying that, despite all efforts, the true face of the far right is coming back. It's the face that does not respect freedoms, the constitutional framework, the independence of the press and fundamental freedoms. Rights were dearly acquired, which are the heart of our values, such as the abolition of the death penalty.
comme l'abolition de la peine de mort. Moi, je tiens à la Constitution française.
I'm attached to the French Constitution. It has clear rules. 5 years, no more mandates. When we talk about constitutional reform, I said that the 7-year term seemed to be a good option, but it does not. It will not be valid in any case of the next mandate, obviously. It's obvious. We don't change the rules during the game.
Pas les règles en cours de partie.
France far-right National Rail leader Marine Le Pen, visiting a cement factory in Gennevilliers, responded to accusation of Emmanuel Macron.
I believe in the intelligence of the French, and I think that they have objectively had enough of this cinema that we have been seeing for 4 days, and which consists in appealing to I do not know what danger that I would represent. Danger Emmanuel Macron is very real. They have been living it for 5 years. The disappearance of freedoms, a France fractured as ever, a contempt and a disdain for the French.
Despite being fined by police for breaking down the rules in Downing Street in June 2020, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologized over number 10 events but rejected calls to resign. Mr. Johnson faced demands from the opposition to resign, but Tory MPs who previously demanded he quit pulled the request, citing Johnson's role as leading Western support for Ukraine.
Long-term structural weakness. Australia, they committed suicide. Today, I've received a fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police relating to an event in Downing Street on the 19th of June 2020. And let me say immediately that I've paid the fine and I once again offer a full apology. I want to be able to get on and deliver the mandate that I have, but also to tackle the problems that the country must face right now and to make sure that we get on with delivering for the people of this country. That is my priority.
On Wednesday, Swiss courts convicted Parisian Vincennes, the former CEO of Refashion Switzerland, guilty of fraud and sentenced him to nearly 4 years in prison at the conclusion of a trial that focused on his extensive use of company funds for personal interests. Vincennes, a former Swiss banker of the year who was charged with generating millions via unlawful agreements when he was CEO of the bank, was convicted by Zurich's district court after one of Switzerland's most high-profile corporate crime trials in decades. On April 15, 2019, while it was being restored, the 850-year-old building known throughout the world caught fire and was ravaged by flames. These years after the Notre Dame fire, investigators are still trying to determine the cause of this dramatic disaster, which partially devastated the Gothic cathedral in the center of Paris. Zara Ferjani has more to tell.
On the 15th of April 2019, while it was in the midst of restoration work, the 850-year-old building Notre Dame de Paris caught fire and lost its spire, its roof, its clock, as well as a part of its vault that was ravaged by flames.
There was the spire, but also part of the scaffolding which fell is in fact part of the vault of Notre Dame, which surely yielded at that moment due to the violent noise.
This tragedy remains a mystery to this day. The investigations carried out by the Criminal Brigade under the leadership of 3 investigating judges from the Paris court have still not made it possible to establish with certainty the cause of the fire. A source close to the fire recently estimates it's 99% accidental, and the cause of the fire will probably never be known.
Vraiment oppressant. It's a really oppressive noise on the building sites. The big construction machines which threw the rubble in a dumpster, and it made a really distressed noise.
The investigators first took samples for many months from the scene of the tragedy, in the middle of hundreds of cubic meters of rubble, in sometimes difficult conditions given the fragility of the building. They then began an analysis phase which is still not complete. According to the source familiar with the matter, new assessments of the rubble have been launched and should last several months. 3 years after the fire that devastated Notre Dame de Paris, the building has regained its original whiteness thanks to an army of craftsmen working for its reopening that is still scheduled for 2024. Before the fire, the cathedral welcomed nearly 12 million visitors, 2,400 officers, and 150 concerts per year.
With this report, we come to an end to our news. A special thanks from me and the rest of the team. May Allah accept our prayers and our fasting. Thank you so much and have a blessed evening.